6th of March. And I see a cast of thousands out there, and I'm very happy to see everybody. And I'm welcoming you back to our professional development practica. I'm glad everyone's here. I hope you had a wonderful morning. And I want to introduce two pieces. One is what this focus is about with regard to this weekend. Although we know we're dealing with seminars and learnings and academics, one of the main foci of the weekend is the concept of social justice and its impact on education. And the second piece is to know that we have a very, very special speaker, Angelina Jackson. And as I said when we were making some comments before we all got on together, Angelina's vita and experiences are unbelievable, and I'm going to leave that to Dr. Mitra when she introduces her and Angelina when she speaks. I think it's important just as an introduction to our guest, as well as a reminder to everybody that at the Union Institute and University, central to our mission is the concept of social justice. And that was really central in 1964 when everything began, and it is still equally central. As a matter of fact, we just had a 3-day Dean's Retreat, and that was basically the focus of the Dean's Retreat as well. I think it's important to know, though, if we went around to this group of about 30, that we would be getting a different either definition or what's important to us about social justice, what we believe in ethically. We'd all have a different feeling, theory, opinion. One of the things we do in the EDD program is to be very clear that our object and our objective is to be very respectful and learn to listen to the other 30 opinions of social justice and understand that if we can spend some time listening to each other, processing what each of us have to say and think about with regard to social justice, we have different conceptions. We focus on 4 main ones, but the basic goal is to listen to each other and understand that there is no one opinion or belief that's more important than the other, but we really do listen to each other's views. If we can walk away in the EDD just being able to do that and then respecting those views, I will consider you having a great success in the EDD program. With all these different views and thoughts and concepts, we also believe that we should devote one piece of every residency. Sometimes it's a half a day, sometimes it's a full day, sometimes it's a presentation. We believe that we allot one piece of that residency to look at one conception and hopefully one action of social justice. And well, I guess that says what we need to say. We've got a background of somebody needing help somewhere. And just to be clear about this, if anyone were to look at the EDD YouTube website, you would see that we have several videos, several films, several presentations that really support what we've been doing as a piece of this program. We have it not only as a part of our mission of our program, we have it as a part of our university outcomes, our EDD competencies, our, as I said, residencies. And so today, and I'm going to ask Dr. Mitra to be so kind as to really speak about Angelina Jackson's accomplishments, we all need to know that she is part of the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. She's managing the Race and Justice Project. And what's very important is that she is an advocate for policy changes related to public education. And for those of us who are very big advocates of public education, which I am and which many of us are in this program, We don't want to lose public education. I know there are wonderful ways to deliver it, and lots of different areas are being funded, but we want to understand that public education in this country historically has educated more people, better, longer, and sometimes faster than any other country. We've done it for a very long time in a very short time. So what Angelina's doing is extraordinarily significant in order to advocate and keep public education as we know it and care about it. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn this over to Anu Mitra, the very famous Dr. Anu Mitra, who deals with the art of social justice and leadership in our program. And Anu, I'd like you to really tell us a little bit about Angelina, and then she can speak somewhat about what she does. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Arlene. And it is such a huge honor for me to welcome Angelina to the Union Institute today. I first heard her about a year ago when I was at a board of directors meeting at the YWCA here in Cincinnati, and she was the featured speaker. And I remember telling her after that talk of hers, which lasted for approximately an hour, that I was totally mesmerized by the statistics and by the narrative that she offered to us about how public education is failing us at so many levels, at so many stages, and how in a city like Cincinnati, there is more and more this direct pipeline from the school to the prison. And so Angelina, as one of the lead attorneys for the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, is managing the Race and Justice Project. And basically, as part of this project, she's dedicated to addressing racial disparities in the system. And she's taken it not only to the realm of litigation, but also to public education reform, to advocacy, to really stirring the pot and figuring out how things can be improved long term. And as she says in one of the articles in which she was quoted, she's here not only to correct the current trend of educational failures in pre-K through 12, which, as I said, creates a direct pipeline from the school to the prison, but she's also here to challenge the assumption that youth are at risk. What she would rather think of is that youth are at promise here, and she is doing her best to focus on that part of the challenge. So a little bit about Angelina. You can see her right here. She's young and gorgeous and beautiful, also intelligent and really passionate about what she does. And all of that came through in the talk that I heard several months ago. She's a Dayton, Ohio native. She went to school around this area, and then when it came time to go to college, she left the Midwest and went to Florida A&M, where she got her degree in English in 1998, her bachelor's degree. And after that, I guess she wanted to enjoy Florida some more and worked in retail in that area for several years in Tallahassee and Jacksonville. But all through, when I was talking to her, she said that the claims of law really tugged at her heart. She really felt like doing something in honor of social justice. And so to address that, she came back to Cincinnati, to the University of Cincinnati's College of Law, and she got her degree in law in 2004. A whole lot of honors followed. She won the College of Law Honors Scholarship. She was the business manager of the Cincinnati Law Review. She was the judicial extern, United States District Court, Southern District of Ohio, with the Honorable Arthur S. Spiegel. And she was also the vice president and academic advisor of the Black Law Students Association. And I guess for all of her work, she was also awarded the National Bar Association's Young Lawyers 2009 Trailblazer Award, which is a big deal. And the reason why I felt that Angelina would be very, very important to us today is because she works in education. She advocates for educational reform. She is embedded in social justice like we are, and she practices leadership on a daily basis in order to make change happen. And for these reasons, it is such a huge honor for me to welcome Angelina and to listen to what she has to say about social justice education and leadership. Angelina.
Thanks, Anu, all for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the work of the Ohio Justice and Policy Center and also my work in relation to advocacy surrounding public education. By way of a little bit of background, OJPC, as we are known, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan law office located here in Cincinnati, Ohio, downtown. Our mission is to advocate for evidence-based reform of the criminal justice system. We want to move from approaches that have historically been known as tough on crime to approaches that are smart on crime. And we also represent individuals who have been marginalized by the criminal justice system. And so our work consists of three broad approaches. We do public education, we do policy advocacy work, and we conduct impact litigation. As Anu mentioned, I am a staff attorney with OJPC, and I also direct the Race and Justice Project. And this particular project uses a combination of the approaches that I discussed earlier to address three primary areas. The first is police misconduct. The second is charging and sentencing practices. And the last is the link between public education and the criminal justice system, which I'm sure that you've all have now become familiar with the term the school-to-prison pipeline. Since I understand that a lot of you are, are educators in K through 12, some of the information that I'm going to discuss today probably are things that you have heard before, but what I plan on doing is essentially giving a context to the issue, talking a little bit about how Cincinnati has been affected, discussing the issues that are driving the pipeline, and talk a little bit about potential solutions and how educators can be advocates for change. So I think that we've all heard this term, the school-to-prison pipeline, and what does that mean? It is the term that's been given to the phenomenon of a combination of factors that are pushing children out of urban public education and ultimately into the criminal justice system. This trend has emerged around the country consistently in urban public school districts, and there are a combination of factors that drive it, but generally speaking, it's regarded to be a combination of the testing practices along with disciplinary practices that have combined to push kids out of mainstream education. The children that are being hit the hardest obviously are poor children of color, because those are the kids who are filling urban public school districts. And consequently, it's of no surprise to see that in our prison system, people of color, and particularly those of a lower socioeconomic background, are drastically overrepresented. Just to kind of go back as to how I got into this issue myself. Historically, my focus was more on things like police misconduct and charging and sentencing, because I feel like that was where I got a lot of my client contact. I had done some criminal defense work in the past, and I was able to observe firsthand disparities in the way that poor people and also people of color are treated by the police, by prosecutors, and by the court system in general. In this position at OJPC, I've had the opportunity to meet with people throughout the community in Cincinnati, as well as legal aid attorneys who are doing direct representation of youth who are experiencing trouble in schools. And it really, to me, cemented the connection between the people that I was seeing on my end when I was ending up doing criminal defense and the youth that they were representing. And so to me, it became more important and more incumbent upon me to, one, educate myself about what is driving this phenomenon, and to, two, think about what I can do as an attorney to address it. I'm a product of the public school system in Dayton, Ohio, and this issue is very near and dear to my heart. So to put it into context, broadly speaking, the nation's prison populations right now are at the highest levels in history. About one of 31 American adults is currently either in prison or on parole. The United States imprisons more people than any other nation, and they do so at the highest per capita rate in the entire world. In 2007, black males were incarcerated across the country at a rate that is 6 times that of white males. And in Ohio, African Americans comprise about 12% of the general population, but almost 48% of the prison population. And I emphasize these statistics because the school-to-prison pipeline is kind of this complex interaction between race and socioeconomic status. But who's bearing the brunt of all of this are African American males. They are the ones with the lowest graduation rates, the highest disciplinary rates, and consequently the highest rates of involvement with the criminal justice system. So if we're talking about the pipeline and what feeds it, there are a couple of factors that are broadly recognized as what is driving this phenomenon. The first is segregated education. These are schools where Black and Latino students are concentrated, and they tend to perform much worse on average than predominantly white or racially integrated schools. Related to that, and following the same principle, are schools that have high rates of concentrated poverty. Schools that are packed with kids from lower socioeconomic brackets perform much worse than schools where the income levels vary. And there is this clear intersection between race and socioeconomic status because people of color are disproportionately low income in this country. In 2005, across the country, 34% of African American children were living in poverty, as were 28% of Hispanic children and 10% of white children. If you look at the Cincinnati Public School District, we have a student body that is about 70% African American and 60% economically disadvantaged. And by that, I mean that 60% of the student body is eligible for free or reduced price lunch. CPS, as we know, is one of the poorest performing school districts in Hamilton County. It's probably regarded as the poorest performing. But I think it's important to emphasize in terms of Hamilton County and also the role that socioeconomics plays in these issues is that there are other school districts with very high percentages of poor students that do not perform well either. And these two examples would be the Laughlin School District in Norwood, which are also have been rated as continuous improvement, but the student bodies are predominantly white in those schools. And I think that really serves to illustrate that there are special challenges in terms of educating student bodies that are predominantly poor. When we talk about inadequate public education vaguely as kind of feeding this pipeline, the factors that people refer to are the lack of experienced and certified teachers, advanced curriculums, early intervention programs, extracurricular programs, and safe and well-equipped facilities. Those things, by and large, are lacking in several large urban public school districts across the country. And one point that I would like to emphasize concerns what's going on here locally in terms of advanced instruction. In the Cincinnati Public Schools, African American boys are 37% of the student body, but they comprise only 17% of gifted and talented classifications. And additionally, one fact that I find to be highly disturbing and troubling is that in the year 04-05, out of a total population of about 30,000 students in CPS, only 15 African American boys participated in an advanced placement math class, and only 20 were in an advanced placement science class. And again, that's out of a population of approximately 30,000 students. The last factor, and one that I feel that I have probably had the most firsthand experience with, and what I see is driving this pipeline is disciplinary practices. And across the country, there's been a lot of talk about zero tolerance policies and how those are driving kids out of school and basically into the juvenile system and then the adult system. But even if there aren't, even if there isn't a quote-unquote zero tolerance policy on the book, the way that we are handling behavior problems in school these days is vastly different than the way that we were handling problems decades ago, even so far back as when I was in school. What's happening is that conduct that a couple of decades ago would have been dealt with by a detention or a talk or a visit to the principal's office is now being dealt with much more severely at times by in-school arrest and ultimately referrals to juvenile court. So when kids are removed from school, whether it be through suspension, expulsion, referral to juvenile court, it makes it much more likely that they are going to be retained in grade, that they're going to drop out, and ultimately that they're going to become incarcerated. This premise is widely accepted, that these type of disciplinary actions are directly correlated to a student's likelihood of being successful in school. There are drastic racial disparities across the country in the way that discipline is meted out in public schools, and Cincinnati is no exception. Back in 2007, African American students were about 76% of CPS student body, but 90% of suspensions, expulsions, alternative school placements, and emergency removals. Beyond the kind of straight racial disparities that are existing, there's kind of another issue related to special needs students. And children of color in public school districts are disproportionately represented in terms of special needs classifications. They're more likely than any other students to be enrolled in a special needs education program for mental retardation or emotional disturbance specifically. And here in Cincinnati, if you there is a link between the manner in which special needs students are being treated disciplinary-wise. And I'm sorry, there's a link between discipline and special needs classifications. In the year 08-09, and I was really surprised to learn this myself, 46% of the suspensions in Cincinnati public schools were special needs students. And the vast majority were for conduct described broadly as disruptive behavior. And this is not categories like fighting, assaulting other students or staff. This is a category that is just called disruptive behavior. These kind of disparities are also reflected in educational outcomes when we're looking down the pike. Approximately across the country, about 9.3% of white students have been retained in grade at least one time. And this is compared to 18% of Native American students, 17.5% of African American students, and 13.2% of Hispanic students. And the disparities kind of go on when you look at suspensions and expulsions. 14.6% of white students have been suspended or expelled in grades 7 through 12, compared to 38.2% of Native American students, 35.1% of African American students, and 19.6% of Latino students. So as you can see across the country, there are these drastic racial disparities, and locally that, we're no exception to that. And there have been studies that have kind of looked at the conduct that's driving this disciplinary action, because I think sometimes there's a reaction that people say, well, it must be that, these kids, these poor Black and Latino kids really are just engaging in more disruptive or troubling behavior. And so therefore it's necessary to use disciplines such as suspensions and expulsions. But in particular, there was one study back in 2000 that showed that African American students are far more likely than their white peers to be suspended, expelled, or arrested at school for the same kind of conduct. And the NAACP Legal Defense Fund puts out a publication citing to this specific study, and I'll give you guys the title so that you can take a look at it yourself if you're interested. It's Russell Skiba, and it's called The Color of Discipline, Sources of Racial and Gender Disproportionality in School Punishment.
I'm sorry.
I've had opportunity to...
Could you just say that again a little slower?
Sure. Russell Skiba, I believe is how you pronounce it, S-K-I-B-A, The Color of Discipline, Sources of Racial and Gender Disproportionality in School Punishment. And I should also let you guys know that I'll be making, our website and my personal contact information available at the end of our chat here today, so that anybody that has any follow-up can feel free to contact me at any time. I've talked at length with an officer and sat on several panels with a Cincinnati police officer who worked for many years as a school resource officer. And one of the things that I think is most troubling is the amount of in-school arrests that have just exploded. He's explained to me that conduct that before, as I mentioned, would be dealt with by a detention or a talk in the principal's office has now become disorderly conduct. That is a criminal offense that then is referred to juvenile court. And this is really disastrous, because if you look at the amounts of all adults who are arrested, those who were arrested as juveniles are 2 to 6 times more likely to be arrested as an adult. So we're seeing how the approach to using police in schools is directly feeding kids right into the system and making them more likely to then go into the adult system. And I'm sure that most of you all have heard the troubling stories across the country that I do not believe are exaggerations of children as young as 5 and 6 years old who are being handcuffed by the police and removed from school because they are a disturbance or because they've thrown a temper tantrum. I think that there is a serious disturbing trend in this country of our public education institutions transferring some of their disciplinary obligations to law enforcement. And what it's doing is it's absolutely devastating scores of young people who I feel that we must believe can otherwise be contributing members of this society. So of all the things that I have kind of discussed today, school discipline to me is the area where I tend to kind of place my focus because of its direct link to the criminal justice system. I'll talk a little bit about the actual dollars and cents cost of educational failure, because it is terribly expensive in terms of lost tax dollars. In the state of Ohio, if we look at the bill for incarcerating an inmate for 1 year, that cost is approximately $24,700 per year. It costs almost $21,000 to house someone here locally at the Hamilton County Jail. In contrast, I guess about a year or two ago it may have gone up. Undergraduate tuition for 1 year at the University of Cincinnati was $9,399. And obviously the education of a region's workforce is also going to stall or going to drive economic development. Here in Cincinnati, just 20% of African American workers attain management or professional positions, and about twice as many white workers do so. And so I think clearly what I've come to see and what you all may know is that educational failure has huge community safety implications. Lack of education, it equals lack of opportunity, and lack of opportunity equals crime. It doesn't get much simpler than that. And so what has happened in the wake of all of these trends? I think the first thing that's happened and that I've noticed is there have been a plethora of reports and studies. I've got stacks of studies and reports and papers laying on my desk. And being an attorney, not really coming from a research background, I was really overwhelmed when I came, kind of into an advocacy position, because I thought, well, what are people doing? They're just sitting around, they're chatting about this, they're talking about it, they're studying. We all know what the problem is, but what can I do about it? What can I do about it as a lawyer? Well, what do lawyers do? You file lawsuits. And I think that as this trend continues, we may see more of this happening across the country. Recently, there's been some class action litigation that has emerged across the country, and it generally follows one of two theories. One theory is disparate disciplinary practices that deprive students of an education, and the other is failure to follow the IDEA. That's one theory that has been followed in a class action lawsuit out of Wisconsin. And the other theory related to disciplinary actions, there have been a class action lawsuit in Georgia and I believe Nevada that have followed those theories. But, litigation is really only one way to address an issue. And to be honest, it can be costly. It's complicated. It can get unwieldy. And I'm not going to say that it should always be the last resort, but it seems to me that it makes more sense to try and address these issues in a grassroots kind of way locally. Because I think that if parties are able to work cooperatively and systemically to address the issue, and that means parents, students, teachers, principals, administrators, and other stakeholders from the community, if these people are able to come in together to craft disciplinary policies and other alternatives to discipline to meet that community's specific needs, I think that that to me may be a preferable way than having someone come in to have to litigate the issue and having a monitor or a federal court kind of overseeing the implementation of what is appropriate for our young people. So with regard to discipline, there have been some very specific recommendations put out there, and I think that a lot of them to me seem common sense, but to those of you who are actually out there day to day, in the educational environment, you may agree or disagree with these type of suggestions. But I think the first is that the use of expulsions, referrals to our alternative schools, referrals to law enforcement, and school-based arrests, those have got to be limited immediately. They need to be limited to students who pose a serious ongoing threat to the safety of students. We should make sure that we are using these types of disciplinary actions judiciously, and that we're not using them in any type of knee-jerk manner, because the consequences to that particular student can actually be quite severe in terms of how that will impact his or her ability to perform successfully later on in school. The same with out-of-school suspensions. These really should be limited to serious misconduct, or when low-level misconduct has just become extremely habitual. Again, wanting to avoid the knee-jerk reaction to broad, kind of vague categories like disrespect or being late to class, things of that nature, which across the country have been grounds for immediate suspension from school and emergency removal. For those school districts that are still operating under zero tolerance policies, they're not getting us to where we need to be. I think there is a serious argument that these policies really have not made the schools any safer per se, and in actuality really are harming the students. so there are models to look to as alternatives for zero tolerance, and I think as stakeholders in the community and as educators, we need to be advocating for the type of models that will help students to be successful. I think that we have to hold schools responsible for at least attempting to eliminate racial disparities. When studies are controlling for other factors and they're finding that these racial disparities are still persisting, that warrants more investigation, and it's something that should be taken very, very seriously. And so there are a number of ways to do this, including kind of keeping track of data, making sure that teachers are receiving cultural competency training, and not only that, but expanding opportunities for training and professional development in other areas like conflict resolution and classroom management and disciplinary alternatives. These should be the rule and not the exception. And lastly, one of the recommendations that has been thrown out there that I think is very important is that there should be disciplinary oversight committees, and these should be composed of school personnel, parents, students, and any other interested community members. And basically these would be committees that would look at data, they would look at policy, they would handle complaints about the conduct of security and police officers in schools, and they would evaluate a school's ability to maintain discipline in a very fair and non-discriminatory manner. I find the presence of police in school to be troubling. I realize that in the era that we live in, that it may be necessary. I'm not going to say that it isn't necessary in every school. I came of age at a time where in an urban public school district, when they were just starting the use of metal detectors and they were just starting the use of police in schools. But I think that we really need to limit this. It's got to be sharply curtailed to limit police involvement to felony offenses that pose an ongoing serious threat to the safety of students or staff. Disorderly conduct arrests should not be made on school grounds. The conduct that legally makes up disorderly conduct, which is things like fighting, vague stuff like turbulent behavior, yelling, cursing, those are not things that a student should be going to juvenile court for. Those are things that need to every extent possible, be dealt with within the school environment. And when there are these school resource officers in place, we should ensure that these individuals are trained, mandatorily trained in terms of cultural competency. And we also need to be training school personnel and school resource officers on the consequences of arrest. A lot of the times, we think that we're just referring these kids out for something that, can take place quickly and be resolved by the court, not knowing that maybe this child will never be seen or heard from again. There's no way to tell whether this child could be sent to the Department of Youth Services. And in fact, having juvenile offenses on your record, while they are not considered criminal convictions, can affect you years on down the line when you become an adult in a number of different ways. Part of what we deal with at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center is helping people who have juvenile offenses and criminal convictions to navigate the rest of their life. Because in the society that we live in, once you are branded an offender, whether it's a juvenile offender, adult offender, or otherwise, a lot of the things that we take for granted in terms of being able to go get a job, being able to get a student loan, being able to get housing, those opportunities are hindered to a serious degree when you've had any involvement in the justice system. So I think that for those individuals who are making these type of referrals, they should be educated on what actually happens to kids and what can potentially happen to them for the rest of their life by making these types of decisions. And so in lieu of that, I think that we need to be making sure that to any extent possible, we're using alternatives such as social service organizations, diversion programs, and other programs that are alternatives to school-based arrest. We need to be using those in every situation. Again, those should be, when we do not use those, that should be the exception, not the rule. You know, this is an overview of this problem. It's huge. Obviously, you all know that. I know it. I see my role as an attorney in this is to kind of step out, educate the community on the direct link between what's going on in public schools and how it's affecting our criminal justice system and how it's affecting people of color. I think that we can't continue to afford to ignore this trend because we're losing scores of youth. I mean, if you look at the local jail population in Hamilton County, it's 90% male, it's 70% black, 50% without a high school diploma. That's what's going on here in Hamilton County. And that's what it is. So I think that, you know, this requires immediate action because I think otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to see more and more of this litigation kind of pop up across the country because I think that people are getting a little bit frustrated with what they perceive as a lack of action and a stagnant approach. And like I said earlier, I don't necessarily think that this is the best way to resolve the issue. And I'm just going to tell a story that somebody told me, a brief story about push out. I myself do not represent individual students who are in school, but I am working with a legal aid attorney right now to try to develop a volunteer program where attorneys can represent students with special needs who are not getting the services that they're entitled to at school before they get suspended, before they get expelled, before they get referred to juvenile court. And this is a story that she told me. An 18-year-old girl, probably maybe, I think, a junior still in high school, who had post-traumatic stress disorder from being sexually assaulted. When her anxiety level kind of rose, what she was supposed to be entitled to do was to go out into the hallway quietly and take 10 minutes to write in her journal until the anxiety had passed. What the school was opting to do instead of allowing the journaling is they were having a male staff member approach this child and speak to her in her face, which of course led to a spiraling out. I think there was some self-injury going on, so on and so forth, which then, of course, obviously becomes a threat to the safety and security of the school. We've got to do a better job. We've got to do a better job. The law requires that we educate all students. That's what the law requires in Ohio. Those that are difficult to educate, those that are even perhaps maybe unpleasant. But we have to do a better job because otherwise it's just going to continue to affect our community and we're going to be dealing with it on the back end. And, you know, in terms of representing people when they are arrested and going off to jail or prison. So that's really pretty much all I have to say about the work that I do in that regard. I am not currently litigating any issues, but I would be happy to take questions kind of about anything that I've spoken on or anything I haven't. I may not be able to answer some of it, but hopefully I can refer you all to, you know, the appropriate resources.